My name is Maya Sorensen. I'm 31 years old, and I was standing in a hospital corridor holding a biopsy report when my father told me I was never worth saving. My younger brother, Caleb, had just lost almost $500,000 of investor money on a crypto trading platform he built out of our parents' garage, and the two of them had spent the entire afternoon on the phone with a securities lawyer trying to keep him out of a courtroom. I had come to tell them that the lump in my thyroid wasn't benign after all, and that I needed a decision about surgery before the month was out. My father looked up from his phone just long enough to say it. We've spent everything trying to keep Caleb standing. You've always managed on your own. Honestly, Maya, you were never worth saving the same way he is. My mother didn't correct him. She just kept scrolling through legal invoices like I hadn't spoken. I didn't cry in that hallway. I said understood, picked up my folder and left. 6 months later, my father was standing outside my apartment door, in a coat too thin for the weather, begging me to help him save the one thing he had left. Before I tell you what that was and what I found in the 6 months between that hospital hallway and his knock on my door, tell me, what time is it where you're watching this from, and where in the world are you right now? I want to know exactly how far this story travels before it's done. Growing up, Caleb was the son my parents introduced with pride, and I was the daughter they described as low maintenance. Sounds like a compliment until you realize it meant invisible. When Caleb crashed the family car at 17, my parents called it a hard lesson about growing up. When I got a B in AP chemistry the same year, my father asked what happened. My mother, Renata, ran a small accounting firm out of our house. My father, Gordon, had spent 3 decades as a regional manager for an industrial supply company before retiring early on a pension he was constantly worried wasn't enough. Between the two of them, money had always been the family's love language. Who got helped financially was who mattered. I became a clinical lab technician, the kind of job my father once described at Thanksgiving as counting blood cells for a living. Caleb, 4 years younger, drifted between failed startups until he landed on something that finally stuck in our parents' imagination. A crypto trading app called Halcyon Ledger that promised algorithmic returns to friends, neighbors, and eventually strangers who found him through a slick landing page. My parents didn't just support Caleb emotionally. They co-signed his business loan, let him list their house as collateral for a line of credit, and told anyone who asked that their son was building the next big thing. I never asked them to co-sign anything for me. I never had anything they considered big enough to co-sign. The thyroid nodule showed up on a routine scan 8 months ago. The first biopsy was inconclusive. The second one, the one I was holding in that hospital hallway, wasn't. Papillary thyroid carcinoma, early stage, highly treatable, if I had surgery within a reasonable window, and if I could actually afford the surgeon my insurance covered only partially. I wasn't asking my parents to pay for it outright. I wanted a short-term loan, the same kind of accommodation they'd extended to Caleb without a second thought, just so I could cover the gap between what insurance paid and what the surgery actually cost. I brought the numbers, the timeline, and a modest repayment plan, the same way I would have brought a lab report to a physician, organized, factual, unemotional. My father barely looked at it. That was the same afternoon Caleb's investors had started asking uncomfortable questions about withdrawal delays. And my parents were 3 hours deep into a call with an attorney about whether Halcyon Ledger's marketing claims counted as securities fraud. You were never worth saving the same way he is, my father said, and went back to his phone. I didn't argue. I'd spent 31 years learning that arguing with my parents about fairness only got me labeled dramatic. I left, drove to the lab where I worked, and sat in the break room until my shift started, feeling strangely calm. I wasn't angry yet. I was just finally completely certain. 3 weeks after the surgery, which I paid for using savings, a payment plan, and a small loan from my coworker Priya, who didn't ask a single question, I went back to my parents' house to pick up a box of childhood things I'd been meaning to collect for years. My mother wasn't home. My father was at a Halcyon Ledger investor meeting trying to buy time. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a specific box in the garage when I found a filing cabinet drawer that hadn't been locked properly. Inside were folders labeled with Caleb's company name, and beneath them, older folders with my name on them that I'd never seen before. They were custodial account statements from a small trust my grandmother had set up for both of us before she passed, meant to be released to each of us at 25. Caleb's had been released and spent years ago, mostly on Halcyon Ledger. Mine showed a balance that should have transferred to me 6 years earlier. It didn't show a transfer. It showed a single withdrawal, made through my father's authorization, 3 months after Caleb's business first needed emergency capital. I sat on the garage floor with that folder for a long time. It wasn't a fortune, just under $40,000, but it was mine, meant for me, quietly redirected into Caleb's failing company the same year my father told anyone who'd listen that Caleb was building something real. I didn't confront anyone. I photographed every page, then drove straight to a lawyer a coworker had once used for a similar family dispute. A woman named Odette Ferris who specialized in trust and fiduciary matters. Odette was blunt. My father, as trustee, had no legal authority to redirect trust funds meant for me into an unrelated business, especially not without my knowledge or consent. It wasn't a gray area. It was a straightforward breach of fiduciary duty, the kind regulators and courts took seriously, especially when there was a paper trail. Do you want to pursue this quietly? Or do you want documentation in case things get complicated? She asked. I chose documentation. Not because I was planning to destroy my parents, but because I had learned the hard way that the moment you tell people like my father the truth, they rewrite the story before you can finish the sentence. While Odette prepared a formal notice, Halcyon Ledger's real problems kept surfacing in the news. A state securities regulator had opened an inquiry into the platform's promised returns, which turned out to be paid largely from new investor deposits rather than actual trading profits. It didn't take a genius to see where this was heading. My parents' house, pledged as collateral, was now sitting inside a company under active investigation. 6 months to the day after that hospital hallway, my father showed up at my apartment. I almost didn't recognize him, thinner, older, wearing a coat that had clearly been through a bad winter already. Maya, he said, I need to talk to you about the house. I let him in mostly out of curiosity. He explained, haltingly, that the state investigation had frozen Halcyon Ledger's accounts, that investors were demanding refunds, and that the bank holding the collateral loan on my parents' house was preparing to call it due. Caleb, he admitted, had disappeared to figure things out, which meant he'd stopped answering anyone's calls, including theirs. We need someone who understands numbers, my father said, which was as close as he'd ever come to acknowledging what I actually did for a living. We need to show the bank a plan. I was hoping you could help us put something together. Talk to people. Vouch for us. He didn't ask about my surgery. He didn't ask if I'd recovered. He asked me to help save the house that had been pledged for the business that had, 6 years earlier, quietly absorbed the trust fund that was supposed to be mine. Do you know what happened to my trust? I asked. He went very still. What trust? Grandma's account. The one that should have transferred to me at 25. He didn't answer right away, and in the silence I understood he knew exactly what I was talking about. That was meant to help the family, he finally said. Caleb needed it more. It wasn't Caleb's to need, I said. It was mine. You signed for a withdrawal you had no right to make and you never told me. He tried the same argument he'd used my whole life, that family's share, that helping Caleb was helping all of us, that I'd always managed fine without it. I let him finish. Then I told him about Odette, about the documentation, about the fact that the fiduciary breach notice had already been filed with the trust's original bank, separately from anything happening with Halcyon Ledger. His face changed. You did this? While we were already dealing with everything else. I did this the week I found the folder, I said. 6 months ago. Around the time you told me I wasn't worth saving. He didn't apologize. Not that day. He asked instead if I would withdraw the fiduciary complaint. Not because it was wrong, he never said that, but because an active breach of trust claim against him personally would make the bank even less likely to work with them on the house. You want me to protect the same system that took my inheritance and my worth in the same conversation, I said. I want you to think about your mother, he said. She'll lose the house too. I told him I'd think about it. I didn't promise anything. He left with less than he came for. And for the first time in my life, I watched him walk away without either of us pretending the conversation had gone fine. I didn't withdraw the complaint. Odette negotiated a settlement instead. My father agreed to repay the trust withdrawal in full, with interest, from whatever remained after the house situation resolved, and to sign documentation formally acknowledging the breach so I'd never have to argue about it again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a public reckoning in front of 300 people. It was paperwork, quiet and exact, which felt right for a wound that had also been created quietly. The house went into a short sale a few months later. Halcyon Ledger's investigation is still open. Caleb resurfaced eventually, cooperating with investigators in exchange for reduced exposure, though restitution to his investors will likely take years, if it happens at all. My mother calls sometimes. She never mentions the trust. My father sends the repayments through Odette's office on schedule without a note attached. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive either of them. I know I stopped waiting for them to decide I was worth something, and started deciding it myself. My scar from the surgery has faded to a thin line most people don't notice unless I point it out. I tell people it's from an old injury. That's not exactly a lie. It just isn't the whole truth. If your family taught you that being low maintenance was a compliment, ask yourself what it actually cost you to earn it. Being easy to overlook is not the same as being loved. And needing help doesn't make you less worth saving. It just means you're finally asking the people who were supposed to show up all along.